Blog Talk Radio.
Good evening. Happy New Year. And welcome to The View Up Here. I'm your host, Canadian Glenn, and it is January 9th, 2019. Tonight's episode, Truth in 2019. Renew or redo. A new year brings new expectations, new hope, new priorities, and the same old disappointing circle jerk of posturing and maneuvering for power and narrative control. Can our recent history give expectation of much else? One would be described as optimistic, to put it kindly, in hoping for some sort of return to a fact-based process regarding anything requiring consent from the citizenry. Well, after all, it only makes sense from a business perspective that the drive to get feelings dominate facts will roll on with as little opposition as possible. It's where the money is. It's where the data is. Once you accept facts, it kind of ends the revenue stream in alternative facts and the opportunity to capitalize on feelings. Everyone has them, and everyone is susceptible. So what does 2019 have in store? Now, this is by no means an exclusive list, let's put it that way. Will the abomination of the Trump administration be curbed, ended, or strengthened? And what would the result of any of those possibilities bring? Will a fictional pipeline be approved again, start construction, or be headed right back to the courts? Will the inescapable fact that the Trans Mountain expansion makes zero economic sense ever be acknowledged? Will vacant emotional rhetoric decide the Alberta election over evidence and reasoned actions despite true motivations? Why is the lesser of evils what it always seems to come down to? And what determines the lesser in that question? Partisanship? Apathy? Ignorance? Logic? Will the federal election campaign be nothing but a polar opposites marketing operation? Despite the narrow actual difference of the end games of our red brand and our blue brand, we're going to try and remain the same on the View Up Here. Facts and credible information matter here, but it's a noisy marketplace of quote-unquote ideas out there. Now, tonight we'll try and give some hints for what 2019 brings for the show, where we'll be looking regarding guests and topics. And, as it says on the show page, listener input is invited tonight. So, put my money where my mouth is. The call-in number, U.S. number, okay, 929-477-3894. There's also a Skype button on the show page. I would suggest having your Skype signed in before you press the button. Less chance of any boo-boos. And then if you've got Google Hangouts or something, you can just phone a number. It's free. I don't think there's going to be a full show tonight anyway. So, hey, Any listeners out there want to weigh in, when we get to that part of the show, I will say what, I have heard from listeners, what they want me to take a look at. There were a few that were mentioned frequently, so that's good direction. And I thank the listeners for that. Well, let's get back to the first one. The Trump administration. What the hell is going to happen in 2019? Well, the 25th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution has been in effect since 1967. It relates to the health and condition of not just the president, but those at the very top of the ladder. It's never been used yet. The emoluments clause you hear about is in Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7, and it deals specifically with whoever is the President of the United States will get paid to be the President of the United States and nothing else. And he certainly cannot use the power of that office to generate income. Gee, do you think maybe there's been an infringement or two? But as I said before on this show and other shows, the founding fathers, quote unquote, of the United States, they foresaw somebody like Trump getting to be president. What they did not foresee was a Congress that would do nothing about it. But what about Herr Trump? It's pretty hard to find stuff that's free from counterweight, shall we say, coming out of the U.S. So the numbers I'm going to use come from Daniel Dale of the Toronto Star, who has become one of those journalists that get connected for eternity to a certain topic or era. Now, according to Mr. Dale, Donald Trump has been president for 717 days and made 4,122 false claims, otherwise known as lies. Overall, that's 5.7 per day. Think how many days there are where nobody even sees them, and it's just these ridiculous tweets. But 5.7 overall of those, little more than 2 years now. 2018 was a tremendous year for the president. 2017, it was only averaged out to 2.9 lies a day. In 2018, that surged to 8.3 per day. And the pace is not falling off. The first week of 2019, 78 lies in a week. That's 11 a day. His first press conference of 2019 had 24 lies. And the first media availability before the first cabinet meeting of 2019, 32 lies. So, renew or redo. I think this is definitely a redo. There's only one way going here, surprisingly enough. But what I'm going to turn to sum it up, to look forward into 2019, I have one article, and I think it puts it all in there. And it is by Daniel Dale, who is the Washington, D.C. bureau chief for the Toronto Star. This came out yesterday after the address to the nation. Mr. Dale's title for the article is Trump Backs Himself into a Corner on Wall Shutdown After TV Address. 3 years and a government shutdown later, it is still not clear how much U.S. President Donald Trump cares about building a giant wall on the Mexican border. What is clear is that he believes he benefits politically when he acts like he does. His immigration instincts propelled him to the presidency. They may now be leading him astray. Now, Trump long ago tossed away his best opportunity to fund this wall by rejecting Democratic deals that would have given him a hefty pile of wall money. Last month, goaded by his allies in right-wing media, he embarked on a high-risk stunt, shutting down part of the U.S. government to try to coerce Democrats to give him a smaller pile of wall money that he had already turned down before. Emboldened by their success in the November midterm elections, in which Trump also tried to pummel them on immigration, the Democrats are simply saying no. 18 days into the second longest shutdown in U.S. history, Trump has no easy way out of a standoff the numbers suggest he is losing. Polls have consistently shown that many more Americans blame Trump than Democrats for the shutdown. They have consistently shown that the wall is highly unpopular with everyone other than Republicans, and they have shown his approval rating at its lowest level in 3 months. Seeking to shift the public conversation, Trump gave a primetime televised speech on the wall on Tuesday night. The speech, Trump's first formal Oval Office address, was intended to ratchet up the pressure on Democratic leaders, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, from whom he is seeking a wall commitment of $5.7 billion. But Trump mostly stuck to the same rhetoric that hasn't worked for him to date, except this time he did his demonizing of unauthorized immigrants in a somber tone rather than the shouts of his rally speeches. Graphically describing several murders, he said Democrats had a moral duty to fund a barrier he insisted would solve a crisis of the heart and a crisis of the soul. For those who refuse to compromise in the name of border security, I would ask, imagine if it was your child, your husband, or your wife whose life was so cruelly shattered and totally broken, the president said. In a joint rebuttal speech, Schumer and Pelosi described the wall as unnecessary and accused Trump of appealing to fear rather than facts. Schumer also suggested Trump was being childish. We don't govern by temper tantrum, Schumer said. Trump has been so dishonest about immigration that his mere request for television airtime set off a furious debate about media ethics, with critics arguing that broadcast executives were doing the public a disservice merely by giving this president unfiltered airtime. Those concerns proved justified. Among other things, Trump falsely claimed Democrats had asked him to build a steel barrier rather than a concrete wall, which is an alternative Trump came up with himself. Falsely claimed the wall would be indirectly funded through his revised NAFTA deal, which has not been approved by Congress and could not fund a wall. Falsely said Democrats would not pony up for border security. Now the Democrats have offered to pay for various security measures, just not a wall. And perhaps biggest, as it turns out, misleadingly suggested a wall would be a significant obstacle to smuggled heroin. And the massive, overwhelming majority of heroin coming into the United States comes through legal ports of entry. There's not people crossing the border in the desert with dime bags in their pockets. But Trump did not take the opportunity to declare a national emergency, as he has mused about doing. An emergency declaration could allow him to tap into potential funding sources for the wall without having to get the usual congressional authorization. It would also be certain to be challenged in court, likely turning into a long legal battle without an immediate winner. But that, some observers said, may be the best possible outcome for Trump at this point. Liam Donovan is a Republican strategist and a lobbyist. He said, "At the moment, I think it's less about getting the wall built and more about getting out of this jam without being seen as capitulating." The shutdown has denied pay to about 800,000 federal workers, some on involuntary leave and some working without pay. It has stopped or slowed hundreds of government activities, from inspections of government housing to the financing of home loans to cleanup services in national parks and monuments. And it has produced a growing number of headlines in which Trump voters, now struggling to pay their bills, have complained that he is harming their lives without a good cause. Doesn't that say something right there? If he had a good cause, would it be all right for him to harm their lives? Republican members of Congress have slowly begun to indicate that they will not let Trump carry on the battle forever. Shortly before Trump's address, CNN published an article in which West Virginia Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito described the shutdown as useless and said she could live with a solution that funded the government and punted the wall debate to a later date. Senator Marco Rubio, Republican Florida, said he could potentially endorse such a solution. Now, the precariousness of Trump's shutdown position has been evident in his dizzying rhetoric over the last month. While demanding that Democrats pony up the $5.7 billion he says he needs to get going on the wall, he has also insisted that the wall will pay for itself and that Mexico is paying for the wall. While promising Democrats that he would build a wall out of steel slats rather than the concrete he has long described, though Democrats' objections are not about the material, he has also insisted an all-concrete wall was never abandoned. His very premise for the Tuesday speech, an illegal immigration crisis, was dubious at best, immigration policy experts say. Government figures do not suggest anything close to a crisis-level influx of unauthorized immigrants. The number of people apprehended crossing the Mexican border, which U.S. officials use as a proxy measure for how many people are trying to cross in total, is a quarter of what it was 2 decades ago. There may be a crisis in the government's inability to handle a record high number of families crossing the border and legally claiming asylum. That, however, is not something that can be addressed by a wall. Now, as Mr. Dale says, he's losing the uniformity. There are Republican members of Congress who made it back in after the midterms. A lot of their friends didn't. These are politicians. They're interested in keeping their jobs. They got their finger up in the air for which way the wind's blowing. Now, do you think, say, 100 or 140 Republican members of the House are willing to risk their seats to defend Trump when it gets to the tipping point? Think again. There's something new every day out of D.C. Another reason that Trump is weakening on the entire wall scam is stuff coming out from his government. Recently, the Director of Homeland Security, Christian Nielsen, appeared before committee. There had been reports from DHS and Custom and Border Patrol that there were 4,000 people stopped trying to cross from Mexico that were on watch lists, that were terror suspects. Once the information was finally revealed, that number went from 4,000 to 6. So, gee, I wonder why people are starting to say enough's enough. So, in my opinion, Trump administration, we're going to get a renew. It may be incremental, but it's going to happen. Because if it's all about power, he's not the winning number for much longer if this bullshit keeps up. But we'll see. Now we move on. Will a fictional pipeline be approved again, start construction, or be headed right back to the courts? And will anybody with any weight ever admit that TMX makes zero economic sense? It never did. That's why it's not built already. Nobody wanted to pay for it. But fear not, Captain Justin won't buy it. Now we all own it. Guess what? Going to get built. But the propaganda surrounding it is different. KeepCanadaWorking.ca is a 100% funded by the Alberta taxpayer propaganda program to manufacture consent for TMX. Keep Canada working. Keep Canada ignorant. Keep feels paramount. I would only recommend to people, if they really want to know what's what, and to be shocked at how easily and frequently governments in Canada lie publicly about this project, take the time to go online and look at the National Energy Board hearings for Trans Mountain. There's a lot more truth in there than you would think. Nobody wants to talk about it. The first thing I want to do, I'm going to talk about the ads and stuff that the Alberta government is running. What a crock of shit they are. And the first thing you have to say about this is, especially the TV commercials, they're buying on network. So the network's not going to be too motivated to devote their local news time to say, you know what, the government's full of shit because they're taking the money to run the ads that taxpayers are paying for. So that's not going to happen. So you have to go look outside of corporate media. And for an article that explains this entire situation that is just typical of the world we live in, I went to the Narwhal. Sharon Riley wrote this, how Alberta is getting away with running deceptive ads on Trans Mountain. Susan, a 59-year-old woman from BC's interior, was watching TV earlier this year when she first laid eyes on one of the Government of Alberta's Keep Canada Working ads to promote the Trans Mountain oil pipeline and tanker project. Began appearing in newspapers and on billboards across the West in April 2018. And began airing on TV and radio stations last summer. The advertisement Susan saw was a cutesy cartoon format featuring animations of mountains, hospitals, and wind turbines, along with birds and people erecting trees. One of Canada's most valuable resources had flowed along the Trans Mountain pipeline since 1953, enriching our lives in many ways. An upbeat jingle played in the background. When interviewed, Susan said the overall tone was a little demeaning. The ad went on to say, the expansion doesn't mean more oil production, a claim that Susan was sure was false. She said it felt manipulative and dishonest. Because she had seen the ad on TV, Susan turned to the Advertising Standards Council, a not-for-profit responsible for administering the Canadian Code of Advertising Standards, which states advertisements must not contain or directly or by implication make inaccurate, deceptive, or otherwise misleading claims, statements, illustrations, or representations. Susan submitted an advertising standards complaint, thinking the Alberta government would be held to account for what she believed were false statements. The ad says the pipeline will not increase oil production, she wrote in her complaint. But news articles show that pipeline availability is a factor in increasing oil production. Now, she wasn't wrong to be concerned about the accuracy of the statement, but it turns out the Canadian Code of Advertising Standards, including the important rules that ensure advertisements are accurate and not deceptive or misleading, do not apply to advertising paid for by the government that is deemed to be about a political issue. Susan was appalled. Government should be held to a higher standard, she said. Jonathan Rose, Associate Professor of Political Studies at Queen's University, echoed Susan's concerns. Professor Rose told the Narwhal he worries about truth in advertising by governments and noted that companies are held to higher standards. It is bizarre that the standard does not apply to parties or governments. You wonder whether government is advertising at the behest of corporate interest. If the government is making an argument the same as a corporation, that should give us pause. Now, when this campaign was first announced, the spending for it was pegged at $1.29 million. That number has now gone up substantially. The government of Alberta has spent $9.87 million on its Keep Canada Working advertising campaign since April, including more than $2 million on its TV and radio ads alone. Now, let me say that was October. It was almost $10 million. Care to guess what it is today? The campaign appears across a variety of platforms: TV and radio ads, billboards across BC, and full-page newspaper advertisements. Then there's a YouTube channel, a Twitter account, and a Facebook account. Now, the Facebook account describes itself as an initiative by the Alberta government to build support for the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion project. When the campaign first debuted, the Alberta government said in a press release that the Keep Canada Working campaign was a nationwide campaign to highlight the economic, social, and environmental benefit of the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion that will inform Canadians about the benefits of market access and counter the misinformation, harassment, and obstruction that the project has faced. Slogans in the campaign include Trans Mountain Pipeline means more money for roads, schools, and hospitals. And Trans Mountain Pipeline is critical to Canada's climate plan. Revenue generated will fund greener energy sources and innovation. But in their efforts to inform Canadians, Susan worried that the government of Alberta was leaving out important pieces of information in some areas and providing false information in others. The commercial claims the pipeline would not increase oil production, but there have been plenty of assertions that the TMX will in fact increase production, including in filings from Kinder Morgan to the National Energy Board, as well as in the intentions of proposed new oil sands mines to use the increased capacity. Document after document lays out in plain language Trans Mountain's intention to carry oil from increased production. When the Narwhal asked how the government verified its claim, the reply in the email, facts and data originate from Government of Alberta researchers and program specialists. In some instances, credible third-party sources, including other levels of government, financial institutions, and academic sources are used. Yeah, we'll get to that. Alberta's export pipeline system is nearing or at capacity based on already existing levels of production. This includes the existing Trans Mountain Pipeline. The expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline to the West Coast is not tied to any specific commitment to increase production, but documents filed with the National Energy Board show otherwise. In its Pipeline Environmental Protection Plan for the TMX project, submitted to the National Energy Board back in 2013, Kinder Morgan's environmental consultants stated that the expansion has been developed in response to requests from Western Canadian oil producers and West Coast refiners for increased pipeline capacity in support of growing oil production. In May 2015, public interest evaluation of TMX, also submitted to the National Energy Board, experts concluded that the pipeline expansion will provide pipeline capacity to transport increased oil production from the Western Canadian production basin. Increased oil production is listed as the first reason put forward by Trans Mountain Pipeline Expansion Project when justifying that the project is in the public interest. And in its final arguments, included in a document filed with the NEB in December 2015, Trans Mountain made its intentions clear. Additional pipeline capacity is required for growing Canadian production. And it doesn't stop there. Proposed greenfield mines, ones where nothing exists at this point, have also indicated their new oil production will flow through the TMX project. Teck Resources, the company behind the proposed Frontier Mine, a 24,000-hectare project, has already been allocated a spot in the expanded TMX line. In the company's 2017 annual report, Teck noted it had contracted 12,000 barrels per day on Kinder Morgan's TMX for delivery to Burnaby. To ship bitumen from the Fort Hills project was just officially opened last month. But none of this stopped the Alberta government from advertising the expansion doesn't mean more oil production. According to the spokesperson from the Advertising Standards Council, there's nothing in any advertising standards, rules, or regulations that can control or limit the content of government advertising or political party advertising. The official response Susan got for her basically rejected complaint was, according to the code, Canadians are entitled to expect that political and election advertising will respect the standards articulated in the code. However, it is not intended that the code govern or restrict the free expression of public opinion or ideas through political or election advertising, which are excluded from the code. Isn't that convenient? A government that can use false money, false facts, and try to manufacture consent. That's the background. We're going to listen to them, and we may have a little bit of comment after each one. Now, this is from Keep Canada Working, a 100% Alberta government-funded exercise in propaganda.
Expanding the Trans Mountain Pipeline boosts Canada's economy. A lack of pipelines means our oil can't get to market efficiently. But Trans Mountain changes that, providing an $80 million a day economic boost to our country, supporting thousands of jobs from coast to coast to coast, and providing money to the businesses and workers that keep our economy moving. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is on Canada's side. Find more facts to share at keepcanadaworking.ca. A message from the Government of Alberta.
Find more facts to share. Holy shit. Okay, this 80 million thing. Wasn't that long ago it was 40 million a day. Once Notley started getting called out on it, she just doubled it to 80. It's like, it's a bigger number. You're supposed to be scared. Shut up. The $40 million number, 40 million a day, is from a Scotiabank report that was done over 2 years ago. And it is so flawed and uses such bogus methodology. Scotiabank themselves admitted that their projections are completely wrong. Now, this all stems from this price differential thing with Western Canada Select and West Texas Intermediate in Cushing, Oklahoma. What Scotiabank did in this report, as Muse Stansel did in their bogus report to the National Energy Board in the Kinder Morgan hearings, is they made the assumption that every barrel of diluted bitumen produced in Alberta was subject to the price differential. That is nowhere near close to the truth. Robin Allen, former member of the NEB and that review process, who's been on the show twice now, stated flatly, by her estimation, that at most it is 1 out of 5 barrels. So when Scotiabank put out their report, they said 40 million. So 20% of that, 8 million. Robin estimated it's no more than $5 million a day. But yet here's the Premier of Alberta insisting that it's $80 million. Robin Allen asked the Premier's Office of Alberta to supply their methodology for this calculation. They gave the same bullshit answer that we got from the Ad Standards Council. Oh, well, you know, we use experts and, you know, statistics and stuff and some third parties. And that third party, Scotiabank, said that the numbers you used are shit. But you don't just use them, you double them. Moving on.
Expanding the Trans Mountain Pipeline makes Canada less reliant on the United States. Existing pipelines only support export to America. The Trans Mountain expansion opens new overseas markets, giving us access to more customers and better prices, generating billions for Canadian priorities and providing the freedom to make our own calls. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is on Canada's side. Find more facts to share at keepcanadaworking.ca. A message from the Government of Alberta.
Oh, boy. Well, there's a classic one there. The bottom line is big oil works for big oil's interest. That's it. The country you're in is really irrelevant to multinational oil corporations. But we're going to lose our dependence on the U.S. for Asian markets. Asian markets. Did Kinder Morgan identify any Asian markets in their submissions to the National Energy Board? No. Did the shippers contracted for TMX submit any Asian markets to the NEB in their reports? No. There are no Asian markets. Again, I refer to Robin Allen's most recent visit on the show. She went over the situation with Pemex, the national petroleum giant of Mexico, who tried to get into the Asian markets. The first thing they had to do was drop their price. And they still did not get market penetration because people have deals. Like anything else, supplier, purchaser, things are working out, everything's cool. Who are you guys? I don't know who you are. I need consistency. I need delivery surety. You're a new player on the block. We don't like you. Forget it. Well, we'll cut our price. Well, we'll try a little bit. And then your first supplier says, hey, what's this? What are you doing? Oh, we thought we'd give them a cut. No. Tell you what we're going to do. We're going to drop you this much, but we want all of it. Tell them to take a hike. Oh, okay. Pemex is a huge petroleum conglomerate. They lost their shorts trying to get into Asia, and they just said, fuck it, and they went home. So, again, if you look at the National Energy Board hearings, when Kinder Morgan themselves were specifically asked, is one of the things in the national interest, is it not that this is necessary to supply foreign markets? Where are these foreign markets? Kinder Morgan's response, and the shippers, the group response was, well, no, we're looking for the opportunity for new markets. There are no new markets. No new markets, no $80 million a day, no schools and unicorns and rainbows, which leads us into the next one.
Expanding the Trans Mountain Pipeline provides billions for innovation and clean technology. Building the greener energy industry of tomorrow can't happen overnight, but Trans Mountain speeds up this transition, shipping oil in a way that produces fewer emissions than rail or truck, generating billions to fund new, lower carbon technologies, and providing the way forward to a brighter future. The Trans Mountain Pipeline is on Canada's side. Find more facts to share at keepcanadaworking.ca. A message from the Government of Alberta.
Oh, it kills me. Find more facts to share. My God, that's hilarious. So what this is telling us is we have to ship more oil to pay for energy transition. Yeah, because there's no money. Yeah, okay. And how much are the annual subsidies to oil and gas in Canada now? How many billions of dollars? There's no money. What can we do? Plus, considering that the Trans Mountain expansion was flogged by Kinder Morgan for 5 years, nobody in the United States would invest in it. They sold some of Kinder Morgan Canada, took that money and paid down their debt in Texas. They couldn't find financing. Even if they would have got approval, even if the protests weren't going on, they didn't have the money to build. Nobody talks about that. But hey, don't worry, Captain Justin bought it. So you want to talk about how there's no new money for energy transition? $5 billion for a 60-year-old piece of infrastructure and a piece of paper that we have the right to take the idea of the expansion. What's that going to cost? Well, I don't know. Nobody's seen a budget. As Robin Allen said, it's going to have to happen sooner or later, probably sometime this spring. Remember, February 22nd is the deadline for the sham environmental assessment, 12 nautical mile limit for whales. Ridiculous. But you know what answer they want. They don't want any problems. They're bending the court ruling from the federal court as much as they can. What do you expect? So what's the expansion going to cost? $10 billion? More? 12? 15? How many more court cases? And you're talking about why we have to build this to fund the transition? What is this costing? And for what? The opportunity for new markets. You think the oil sands aren't going to expand if this pipeline gets built? That's exactly why this pipeline will not die. Yeah, Paris targets. Yeah, real leader. TMX, redo, all the way. Obviously, nobody's going to tell the truth. It's just going to keep going. What a waste of money. What a waste of time. When you look at the IPCC report, etc., with the amount of time left before things start getting serious, you're going to spend all that money on this stupid thing? The Alberta election. Oh, this is going to be a doozy. It could be any time from March to the end of May. There are laws in place about advertising. That's why things have quieted down in Alberta. The Used Car Party and all their other friends, Unite Alberta, Alberta Can't Wait, Shaping Alberta's Future, Canada Action Coalition. They've all had to tone it down a bit because we're within the pre-election period by law, so fundraising and spending money has gotten reeled in. When we get to pre-writ period, I'm sure new ads will show up. Is this going to be a repeat of Ontario? Is this just empty, grandstanding bullshit? The feelings of hatred have been built to such a level that actually looking at the record of the sitting government won't matter. Who knows? I mean, that's certainly the way the UCP is playing it. I can understand it. It worked in Ontario. Why the hell wouldn't it work here? But that's a two-sided coin. Alberta can watch what's happening in Ontario. 6 months in, Doug Ford is, if you had another vote now, he'd be out on his ass. So thanks for taking the bullet, Ontario. We'll see if we can escape. I doubt it, but we'll see. I mean, I have a whole theory about what 2019 is going to bring, but that's some bitumen-coated tinfoil. We'll save that for now. I'm not going to spill that out in the first show of the year because A, I could be completely off the mark, or B, I don't want to leak it yet. As I said in the opening, why does it come down to this lesser of evils thing? I'm an Albertan, a born Albertan, which you have to distinguish, not a Saskatchewan Albertan. Thank you. Has the Notley government changed a lot of things? Have they made some progress on stuff that was on permanent ignore? Yes, they have. Have they gone all commie, like some people like to whine about? No, absolutely not. This NDP government is not a socialist government. This is a centrist bordering on free market government. The one stand they took, right when they came in and everything went for a shit, they refused to slash jobs because they actually had the balls to say, if we eliminate all these jobs, how much burden does that dump on the federal government? And what's the point? Because when you look at the reality of the situation, Alberta has the ability to raise so much more revenue than it does because its taxes are so ridiculously low compared to the rest of the country. So Alberta basically has a very, very high credit rating. You know, like you hear GDP to debt ratio. Alberta could have $20 billion deficits and it wouldn't scare away the banks. Can't do it forever, but they could. That's how much potential is here. It's impossible for any government in Alberta to come in and say they're going to jack up taxes because you're just guaranteeing your exit next vote. Even the NDP government will not say the word sales tax in Alberta because that is political death. So what exactly is this lesser of evils? I mean, if you want to talk about it from a larceny angle, yeah, of course. All those who want to make as much as they possibly can want the UCP to win. There are people who think that things suck, but the sky didn't fall. They remember what Klein did. Like Alberta had a premier who blew up hospitals and was there to attend because it was such a great occasion. Alberta never recovered from that. It created a deficit that exists to this day. And now that the tide has come, when hydrocarbons are on the downward slope, it's not a good time to try and catch up. Well, what's going to determine this lesser of evils? Take a look at what we're seeing in media, what we can expect to see in media. Partisanship is hyper-partisanship. I still say apathy is the biggest wild card. If it can somehow be turned around and people can actually consider what would work for them and what wouldn't, instead of just saying it's all bullshit, doesn't matter if it's all bullshit. This bullshit is going to control your life. It's the fucking government. So maybe you should pay attention. Or will it just be capitalizing on ignorance, as seems to be the de rigueur these days? Being government gives you advantages, it gives you disadvantages. But then again, when your opposition is running a campaign exactly like Doug Ford did, with nothing but slogans and sound bites and lots of rah-rah, go-get-em yahoos, zero platform, and zero real pressure to deliver a platform. It's a carte blanche. And Ontario, we're seeing what happens. But I mean, if you want to just take a little bit of logic, because the way I want to look at this for this show tonight, going into 2019, yeah, it looks bad for the Notley government. There's no doubt about it. Any poll you want right now, they lose. But who wins? Jason Kenney showed up in Alberta again. His first step was become leader of the Progressive Conservative Party that had been knocked out of office after 44 years in 2015. They were just, there's nothing left of them. He came in. There were rumors already of him stacking riding boards, memberships coming in by, the brown envelope. He won. He said he would reveal his donors. To this day, he has not. The next step was merging of the Wild Rose and the PCs into the United Conservative Party. He ran for that leadership. He said he would reveal all his donors. Has he ever done that? Nope. What about the PACs, the Political Action Committees, with all their shady links? As I said before, we got Unite Alberta, Alberta Can't Wait, Shaping Alberta's Future. A common thread here is the New West Public Affairs Company. It's also involved the Canada Action Coalition, which is a front for the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. What about what he did to Brian Jean? Now we're hearing the story about how Jeff Callaway, former president of the Wild Rose Party on more than one occasion, joined the UCP leadership race late, stuck around for, a month, 6 weeks, then dropped out. As soon as I saw Jeff Callaway enter this contest, I knew something had to be going on. I'm familiar with Mr. Callaway. Now we find out that Jeff Callaway was involved in saying things about Brian Jean that Jason Kenney couldn't get away with. I mean, this was a very standard constructed conservative leadership race. We had the incumbent, Jean, who, had to go. We got Kenney, super doofus. We got Callaway shows up to shit on Jean. And we have Doug Schweitzer from Calgary, a money man, a member of the Latter-day Saints, another appeasement to a part of the party. Everybody knew Kenney was going to win. Callaway helped it along. When Jason Kenney won the UCP leadership, he said how he was looking forward to working with Brian Jean. And, we're building a strong party. Big tents, big tents. That was on a weekend in October. The first day of business, the next Monday, without a seat in the legislature. But the new leader of the party, Jason Kenney, fired Brian Jean's entire office of the leader of opposition staff. All of them. Yeah, it really sounds like you're interested in working together. Right on. He became UCP leader on October 29, 2017. He didn't get into the legislature until December 14, 2017. So he eliminated somewhere around 20 jobs for the opposition party without even being able to go in the building and sit at the benches. His grassroots guarantee, well, we've heard all about that. He holds the pen. Our policy will be created by our membership, but I hold the pen. The nomination scandals, the party membership scandals, the other affiliations of some of the members, which resulted in membership vetting, but only for new members. So if you're a Nazi or an Islamophobe or any kind of freak, you already have your party card, you're good. Don't worry about it. Just you bring your friends, they better not be too rad. The fundraising scandals. There are Elections Alberta investigations into the UCP going on right now. Those complaints brought by nominees or candidates for nomination that were either dismissed or lost and they think there's monkey business going on. We've had entire constituency association boards resigning over parachuting candidates, an unfair candidate selection process. This is nothing new. This is the way it's been in conservative Alberta for decades. This is absolutely nothing new. I saw it firsthand with the Wild Rose Party. This is how it works. To a degree, this is how every political party works. That's why there's a hierarchy. So will there be any reason returned to Alberta in this election period? I'd have to say that's a redo. Absolutely not. Of course, we have the big decisions that will be coming regarding, approval of Trans Mountain and blah, 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 and all this shit. It's all going to have a big impact in Alberta. I doubt the legislature will sit again now at this point. I think that they may come back with a budget. They may not. I don't know. I have no idea what they're going to do, but it'll be interesting. Now, one thing I want to turn to about how the used car party, United Conservative Party, raises their money and who's helping them and who's not. Something from October 25th, 2018, from Progress Alberta. Meet the rich and powerful men financing Kenney's latest attack PAC. Now, this is in October, remember. Let's call the political advertisements that have been flooding TV, radio, and print media all of October what they really are: class warfare. In December, campaign finance restrictions kick in, including a hard cap on how much money can go towards political ads. A set of very wealthy Albertans are rushing to pour as much big money into ads as they can before that deadline hits. It's a small group, and they're not your average working class folk. It's a group of people so wealthy they can buy billboards, newspaper ads, and expensive radio and TV ads to push for their own interests. In the past few weeks, we've seen more and more of this big money politics from one group in particular. They're called Shaping Alberta's Future, and they're stumping for Jason Kenney. In just a few months, they've raised hundreds of thousands of dollars, more than the Alberta Party has raised in an entire year. And they've put that money to work right away, buying up TV ads across the province that call for worker protections to be rolled back, for the minimum wage to be lowered, and for Alberta's climate plan to be torn up. About two-thirds of that mountain of cash came from the Motor Dealership Association of Alberta, an umbrella group that represents car dealerships. Think of them as the car salesman lobby. Now, they met with Jason Kenney on September 6th, and we'll never know exactly what was said behind closed doors, but immediately after the meeting, MDAA Chairman Andrew Robinson sent this letter out to all the dealerships in the association. September 6th, UCP leader Jason Kenney attended the MDA board meeting to respond to the concerns addressed in the letter of June 29th by the MDA, identifying the negative impacts to the automotive industry due to budgetary and legislative changes imposed by the Alberta NDP government over the past 3 years. After winning the next provincial election, Mr. Kenney's UCP government would address MDA dealer members' concerns in the following manner. 1. Carbon tax. The provincial carbon tax would be scrapped immediately. He would join the coalition of other provinces in opposing the proposed federal carbon tax. 2. Other taxes. Corporate and personal income tax increases imposed by the NDP government would be rolled back. 3. Minimum wages. Minimum wages would be frozen until other Canadian provinces catch up. His transition team will be exploring graduated minimum wages for youth workers until other Canadian provinces catch up. Well, for Saskatchewan, that'll probably be 30 years. Number 4, Labor Code. All the recent legislative changes to these will be cancelled. Consumer Protection Act changes. The MDA president will be asked to meet with the UCP transition team to provide input on how to rebalance the playing field between consumers and industry. What the Alberta government did is they took away an authority from the Dealers Association. There's an organization called AMVIC, and it's kind of a watchdog on the industry. It's responsible for policing car dealers in Alberta. Under the Progressive Conservatives, AMVIC was under the authority of the dealers themselves. The NDP decided to make it independent. Imagine that. And of course, the Motor Dealers Association is not in favor of that. Number 6, issues requiring government action. Banning of imported right-hand drive Asian vehicles. Legislation will be pushed through the legislature. What a puny, petty thing to do. If you're going to buy a car here, boy, it better be from us. You're not importing one. Unbelievable. A good discussion on various other issues were discussed, such as his plan to reduce regulations and red tape so Alberta can be open for business again. Heard that phrase anywhere, Ontario? Mr. Kenney also shared one of his biggest challenges he and his colleagues will face leading up to the election. Sources inform him that the NDP has amassed an election war chest in the $7 to $8 million range. The NDP has legislated changes to the election spending rules. During the writ period of the election, all parties are capped at a $2 million level, and only personal donations up to $4,000 can be accepted per calendar year. Elections Alberta allows for third-party advertisers. There is no cap on the amount of contributions. Isn't that interesting? And then they go for the sell. I mean, this is car salesmen selling to car salesmen. According to recent polls, the UCP presently has a favorable lead over the NDP. However, the challenge is the UCP war chest at this time prevents them from countering the negative ads against the UCP from various provincial unions. Other groups receive funding from left-leaning socialist agencies and/or funds from the NDP party campaigning against the right. Without adequate funding, the UCP cannot counter these allegations, and when there is no rebuttal, one loses the media messaging battle. The board members discussed how we could help this pro-business party. The board made 2 motions. that the Motor Dealers Association contribute $100,000 to the Shaping Alberta's Future political action campaign to assist the UCP, that the MDA solicit its dealer members to contribute to Shaping Alberta's Future. The MDA's goal donation is $1 million. They suggest that each dealership write a check in the amount of $5,000. All of the dealers at the MDA board meeting committed to a contribution of $5,000 for each of their dealerships, and they encourage all member dealers to do the same before October 15th. All checks are to be made payable to. Isn't that politics as usual, especially in Alberta? But was it corporate media that sought this information? No, it was independent media, Progress Alberta. Then it got picked up. Then it became a shitstorm. These are people who have no interest in advancing the cause of the average person. That's why in the first paragraph of that from Progress Alberta, they called it class warfare. That's a strong term, gets misused and misimplicated, but there it is. Now, so that's all I have to say about the Alberta situation for now. As far as looking forward in the spring, residents of British Columbia, regular listeners of The View Up Here, you were witness to the effort that this show put in to inform people about what was happening in BC. As much time as I had, I did it in Ontario as well. Since I'm sitting in the goddamn provincial capital, yeah, I'll be covering Alberta. And I have been talking to people, of course, those not with the mainstream, but there are a lot of new media that are reasonable, appreciate facts. I am talking to them. I'm talking to the Alberta Advantage. I'm talking to Progress Alberta. I'm talking to David Clemenhaga. I'm talking to other people, just like I found my Bob Mackins and my Merv 80s and Norm Farrell's and Sarah Miller's and Sarah Cox and everybody else who helped me with BC. So we'll see what I can get done there. On to number 4. Will the federal election campaign be nothing but a polar opposites marketing operation, despite the narrow actual difference of end games? Well, I think anybody who pays any attention to any type of social media knows where the two major parties in Canada are headed. Of course, we have the blue side with the provincial mouthpieces getting involved as they never have before. They seem to want to make this carbon tax the fight. Well, so be it. As long as facts are allowed, I don't see an issue. But I pulled 2 articles from today in the new year to give us a little bit of a look ahead. Because when the time comes, yeah, you could say the View Up Here will be covering the federal election a little bit. This is from today in the Hill Times, Les Whittington. It's shaping up as a tough year for the election-bound Liberals. Now, the polls show conclusively that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and the Liberals are in a position where the October 21st election is theirs to lose. Trudeau remains fairly popular, and majority governments usually get a second kick at the can. Sorry, Harper. But after 2 years of relatively smooth operations by the Liberals, the divisions and risks that emerged in 2018 have changed the electoral landscape and appear to have made Trudeau's bid for re-election a lot more difficult. On what is shaping up as potentially the most fractious issue, Trudeau has found himself in a bruising clash with several premiers over climate change policy. Now, Canadians tell pollsters they want action on global warming, but leaving aside Quebec and British Columbia, convincing voters to actually accept a carbon tax will put Trudeau's abilities to the test. Ontario, once a federal ally on this issue, has, under PC Premier Doug Ford, dismissed federal climate change measures and assumed the leadership in the outright provincial challenge, including Saskatchewan and New Brunswick, to Ottawa's authority to impose tax-based anti-emissions rules. Economists generally agree that putting a price on carbon is the only approach that offers much hope of addressing climate change. Still, in the U.S. and Europe, the issue has proven highly volatile among populations feeling squeezed by rising living costs and stagnant wages. And in last year's Ontario election, voters seemed more than willing to accept Ford's benighted rejection of the need to do anything about it. With a federal election nearing, Conservative leader Andrew Scheer has opted to buy into the cynical Trump-Ford-Kenney approach to climate irresponsibility in hopes of selling himself as a friend of the average person. Expect Scheer to channel Ford by eventually announcing an environmental package heavy on things like conservation and trash collection and dependent on promised new regulations to supposedly reduce greenhouse gas emissions by industry, an approach likely to cost people more in the long run than a carbon tax. As for the Liberals, it will only be a matter of months before they learn the effectiveness, or lack thereof, of their plan to win voters over in provinces where Ottawa is imposing a carbon tax by directly rebating fees collected to families and individuals. For this to work, Trudeau will have to succeed in connecting the dots in advance of the October 21st election. Energy, an issue Trudeau handled effectively in the last campaign, has become a nightmare for the federal government. The idea of establishing a trade-off between tighter environmental controls and social license for more pipelines, an anchor of the Liberals' 2015 platform, has never come to fruition and is liable now to cost the Liberals a lot of votes in Alberta and BC. Immigration is certain to be a wedge issue. Eager to deflect the threat from Maxime Bernier's far-right People's Party of Canada, the federal Conservatives seem prepared to try to churn up public resentment and anger towards the Liberal government by conflating asylum seekers with illegal immigrants, taking advantage of Canadians' generosity. All the ingredients, including the Ford government's provocative rhetoric, are there for this to become a divisive, inflammatory election topic. However, seeking to capitalize on bigotry, as the Conservatives learned in 2015, has its risks. The economy looks like a pre-election wildcard. Canada has, in the past few years, recorded some of its most reassuring economic performances since the 2008 recession, and employment hovers at a 40-year low. And again, for 2019, Finance Minister Bill Morneau is forecasting fairly robust growth. But the outlook is clouded by numerous unknowns, including rising interest rates, market turbulence, low oil prices, and significant question marks on the trade front. The potential negative impact globally from Brexit and U.S.-China tensions is considerable. But the biggest threat to the Canadian economy still lies with uncertainty around NAFTA. The credit the Liberals won in the NAFTA 2.0 negotiations for largely preserving Canada's preferential access to the all-important U.S. market could be badly eroded if the new version of the pact gets held up by the political warfare pitting Trump against Democrats in the U.S. Congress. Well, that's fair enough, but I mean, there's a couple things that are angled in here as well. Employment hovers at a 40-year low. Oh, yeah, that's true. You know what they don't talk about is how the number of people who have left the workforce is higher than it's ever been. You know, this is why the longer a recession goes, sooner or later the numbers start to come down because people have been out of work so long, they're not counted as unemployed anymore. They become invisible to the statistic. So let's remember that. But Les brings up what are going to be issues, without a doubt. Now, one more piece today in the Hill Times. Lisa Van Dusen. The question for 2019 isn't who will win, it's WTF. There was a time, and it wasn't even as long ago as the last millennium, when the first column of an election year would open with a disclaimer. Politics is full of uncertainties, and then proceed to flagrantly disregard them by prognosticating anyway. In 2019, at a time when politics in democracies worldwide is defined by the kind of big budget, high concept lunacy that produces Donald Trump as President of the United States and the relentless rolling debacle of Brexit, that disclaimer has been rendered more of a surrender and the prognostications more like soothsaying. In his excellent weekly Canada letter explaining the exotic political anthropology and cheesy consumption habits of Canadians to our American neighbors and the world, the New York Times' Ian Austin last week tentatively presented the question of whether Prime Minister Justin Trudeau can win a second mandate. Austin quoted pollster Frank Graves to register the all bets are off element now required of every election story these days, written before the actual results are in. Anyone who knows what's going to happen in 2019 is much smarter than I am, Frank Graves said, but nonetheless predicting, it's going to be a brawl. It isn't going to be pretty. That combination of conditioned uncertainty and presumption of chaos may be the most destructive factor facing politics in the age of the previously unthinkable. When people believe that anything can happen, when columnists can no longer marshal their years spent quizzing cab drivers and forgetting yet another charger at the Holiday Inn to the cause of fomenting conventional wisdom, because conventional wisdom is dead. When pollsters fling up their hands in I don't know nothing about nothing helplessness at the prospect of prospecting in a fog of inexplicable applicability, then democracy dies in darkness, goes from being a slogan to being a spoiler alert. The convergence of technology, corruption, and narrative warfare that has produced recent history's parade of political shock headlines is, in reality, actual reality, not reality show reality, in reality, not the product of some mysterious paranormal fog stalking the hapless denizens of sleepy democracies. The interests, geopolitical, political, covert, and business, who've benefited from the particular fog of this new brand of warfare have been neither subtle nor coy. From Russia to China to central casting, Bannonite candidates to Cambridge Analytica, Palantir, and Facebook, the players who are leveraging technology for a uniquely 21st century consolidation of power in unelected, anti-democratic hands have been surprisingly brazen in both their operations and their intentions. The most important questions at the beginning of this election year in Canada, and what will be a campaign year, if not an actual election year in the U.S., are not who will win and how much confusion and toxicity will be generated in the process, but how they will win and whose interests will be served by their victory. Trudeau has consistently identified himself unabashedly with democracy, human rights, and the rules-based international order, currently being undermined by, among others, the President of the United States, which these days makes the Canadian Prime Minister a tactical target in the same way Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron have been, based on the screwball, wildly counterintuitive and dystopian campaign narratives that have unfolded since the end of the Obama era, marked the beginning of a crisis for democracy and an opportunity for its opponents. The assumption that any election process anywhere will be a brawl seems like a safe one. The normalization of political chaos depends on that assumption. So while we brace ourselves for what could be anything, from a stunning upset to a dumpster fire of 2016 proportions, we should keep in mind every day not what election campaigns used to look like, but what they are supposed to look like. That's why I picked that column, to wrap that up. I share a lot of sentiment there. Now, another big issue that is going to work its way into the 2019 campaign, because this ain't going to be over in a week. Take a look at what's happening in British Columbia right now. Arrests, RCMP, reconciliation? Don't look like it to me. A long way to go. These are the issues that are so very hard for pollsters, for anybody to gauge. First Nations problems. We saw what I Don't Know More did. We saw the day after the arrests, protests all across Canada with good numbers. Things are going to come to a head. I asked listeners to tell me what they wanted to have on the show, what I should be covering. There were a few subjects that got multiple flags. Carbon tax, number one. Like I said, this issue of feelings are more important than facts. I really don't understand how anybody anymore could be a climate change denialist. I really have no excuse for that other than Dunning-Kruger or something very similar. The same thing can be explained so differently by different brands in our political league. I will devote time to the carbon tax in 2019, without a doubt. We'll see where this court case goes, where it should go into the dumpster, but we'll see. TMX, of course. We'll see what happens. February, as I said, supposed to get the decision from the NEB on the environmental impact with a ridiculously compromised 12-mile limit. That may be enough to end this in court again. We shall see. The First Nations issue. I actually feel quite negligent that it's been so long that I've had excellent First Nation guests on the show. They've been busy. I've been busy. I'm going to try and do better and get them on. Other things that were brought up by listeners. A couple people like the View Up Here Global episode. Thank you very much. They're different. They're fun to do. They do generally have a wider appeal because it's not Canadian federal politics or Canadian provincial politics. They will keep happening, but can I give any prediction or schedule? No, absolutely not. But thank you. They will keep coming. Listeners know that I'm not big on promoting before I have everything locked down, because if something happens, then you just look like an idiot. You know, I've already said I'm trying to line stuff up for Alberta election coverage. Trans Mountain is always something I'm watching. Parliament right now is a little slow. They're going to stay out for a while yet. I believe it's the second week of February they come back. May be wrong about that. But I can tell you what a couple shows before the end of January will be like. Democracy Watch is an organization that's been around since 1993. They have themselves been responsible for more than 160 changes in regulations or laws in Canada based on their mission, which is their name, Democracy Watch. Duff Conacher has been head of Democracy Watch since its inception. Soon I will be interviewing Mr. Conacher, and finally we'll have a Democracy Watch episode. Also, someone else that I really want to have on the show. I think it's going to be a good one. We're working over what we're going to talk about now. This should be before the end of the month. Nora Loretto will be on the View Up Here. Nora had a rather colorful 2018. Can't tell you exactly where we're going to go, what we discuss. We'll see what happens. There are other people I'm talking to, other organizations. There will be, just like for the BC election, I did a show about the schools. I did a show about healthcare. I tried to break it all down. Healthcare is going to be a huge issue in the Alberta election. The UCP is very much in favor of starting to privatize healthcare. Sandra Azokar has been at the forefront of Medicare protection in Alberta. Friends of Medicare. I will be having her on sometime in the near future. And that's about all I'm willing to say for now. But, listeners, Happy New Year. It's 2019. If you're in Alberta, we got 2 knock 'em down, drag 'em out, bullshit-cutting elections. In 2019, again, I don't really open the chat on the show too much anymore unless I get a request. But hey, hit me up on Twitter or email glenn@theviewuphere.ca. I do this show for people to hear the information. So that means you people, something I should be doing, let me know. And that's it. We're going to wrap it up early tonight. But a review, to recap, the Trump administration, I see a renew. This is not going to go on forever. The tipping point is coming. TMX, definitely redo. Alberta ridiculousness, definitely a redo. The federal campaign, will it be more of this supermarket, data-driven political gamesmanship? I would expect so. We haven't even hit the peak of that yet, so that's a redo. But thank you for listening. We'll be back next week. I'll try and get it ironed out what next week's show will be as soon as possible. Have a nice evening. Thank you for listening to The View Up Here. We'll see you next week. Good night.